What happens when a black teenager stands in front of his elite private school class and proudly says, "My father works at the Pentagon," only to be mocked by his teacher and laughed at by his peers? Most students would have stayed silent. Most parents would have called the school. But this time, the man they underestimated walked through the door, and he didn't just change the room. He exposed a truth many people still refuse to see. Here's how one quiet father and one brave son turned a moment of humiliation into a lesson this school will never forget. The first laugh came from the corner seat. Then it spread, a low ripple of snickers that filled the room like a slow leak. Darius Thompson stood near the whiteboard, his palms still holding the note cards he had spent the whole weekend preparing. "My name is Darius, and my presentation is about cybersecurity and why it matters," he had begun. He had barely gotten through his second slide when the question started, smirking, shallow, the kind that carried more bite than curiosity. "Wait, did you just say your dad works at the Pentagon?" Miss Whitaker's voice cut through the classroom like a knife wrapped in velvet. "That's quite the job title for a man we've never seen at any school event." She wasn't yelling. She didn't have to. Her tone did the work. A few kids chuckled louder now, emboldened. One leaned over to another and whispered something that made their shoulders shake with laughter. Darius didn't flinch, but his fingers tightened around the note cards. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am, Marcus Thompson. He works in cyber defense." Miss Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? That's interesting. And what exactly does he do there? Save the world between parent-teacher meetings?" The class erupted. Darius stared at the floor. He wasn't ashamed of his father. He just didn't know how to protect him from a room that had already decided to laugh. The kind of laugh that doesn't ask questions. The kind that says, "We've already made up our minds about you." The screen behind him dimmed as the projector flickered. No one noticed. They were too busy looking at Darius like he was the punchline of his own story. Frank Delaney, a 71-year-old retired Air Force engineer, once said the worst kind of humiliation is the kind that wears a smile. "They won't call you a liar outright," he remembered telling his grandson, "but they'll laugh in a way that makes the truth feel smaller." Watching scenes like this, he said, felt like watching his past replay through someone else's pain. Darius stood still as the bell rang. No one moved for a moment, as if they were waiting for a final line to seal the joke. But he didn't say anything. He just walked back to his seat, not slowly, not quickly. Just enough to show he wasn't crushed. Not yet. He packed up his bag, slid his note cards into the front pocket, and stared at the board for a beat longer than needed. The teacher erased his slide without a word. But Darius wasn't finished. Not really. And the next call he made would change the entire tone of the room. The hallway emptied around him. Lockers slammed, shoes squeaked against polished floors. But Darius stayed behind. He sat in the second row, hands folded on top of his closed notebook, staring at the spot where Miss Whitaker had stood just minutes earlier. His classmates were gone. The laughter had faded. What lingered wasn't noise, it was doubt. He had told the truth. He knew that. But when enough people question something, even the truth begins to feel shaky. Darius pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos of his dad. One from the backyard barbecue last fall, another from the day they went fishing and caught nothing but mud. Ordinary moments. Not what people imagined when they thought of Pentagon men. Not what Miss Whitaker imagined either. She had wanted someone in a suit, someone loud and sharp. Instead, his dad was quiet, private, never made a scene. Darius replayed her words again. "That's quite the job title for a man we've never seen." It wasn't curiosity. It was dismissal. And worse, permission. She had signaled to the class that it was okay to doubt him, to mock him. That's what stayed with him, not the joke. The permission. Pauline Green, a 67-year-old retired nurse, once said that silence after humiliation is louder than any insult. It's in that silence, she said, that young people start deciding whether to shrink or stand. She remembered the day a surgeon questioned her medical orders in front of a patient, not because she was wrong, but because she was the only black woman in the room. "I didn't say anything that day," she recalled, "but I never forgot the look on the patient's face, like I disappeared right in front of him." Darius didn't want to disappear. He stood up and walked slowly toward the classroom door. His fingers hovered above the phone screen. For a second, he considered deleting the photos, or maybe texting a friend, pretending nothing happened. But instead he found his dad's number and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice, steady and calm, picked up. "Hey son, everything all right?" Darius hesitated. His throat tightened. Then came the words, "Can you come to Parents' Day?" A pause, then a quiet breath on the other end. "I'll be there." Darius didn't need an apology from the room. He didn't need laughter to stop. He just needed one thing: for them to see who his father really was. Not for revenge, not for drama, just to put weight back on the truth. As he stepped out into the hallway, the late sun hit the windows. A long shadow stretched behind him, but for the first time all day, it didn't feel heavy. Marcus Thompson didn't need to ask for details. He heard it in his son's voice, the slight tremble, the spaces between words. He knew that kind of silence. He had worn it himself years ago, in meeting rooms where titles meant less than skin color, and truth often had to wait its turn. He didn't ask, "What happened?" He didn't say, "Are you sure?" He simply said, "What time should I be there?" That night, Darius sat on the couch while Marcus prepared tea in the kitchen. No TV, no small talk, just the hum of the kettle and the weight of something unspoken. When Marcus returned, he handed Darius a cup and took the seat across from him. "You know," he said, stirring his own tea, "you shouldn't have to prove who your family is. But sometimes silence is a kind of erasure. And when that happens, we don't speak to be loud, we speak to be seen." Darius nodded. He didn't have much to say. He had already said enough in that classroom. More than enough, really. What he needed now wasn't more words. It was presence. Harold Simmons, now 76, once shared that the most important moment in his life wasn't the day he graduated from the military academy, but the day his father showed up unannounced after a white instructor publicly questioned his right to be there. "He never raised his voice," Harold said. "He just sat in the front row, didn't smile, didn't blink. And when I looked over, I saw him. That was enough. That said everything." Marcus pulled out a small case from his briefcase. Inside was his badge, his identification, the symbol most people only saw behind TV news graphics or government buildings they couldn't enter. He handed it to Darius. "This is not for show," he said. "But if they're going to question who I am, let's give them no room for confusion." That night, Darius went to bed without saying goodnight. Not out of disrespect, but because some days are so full, they leave no room for ordinary rituals. Marcus stayed at the table a while longer, looking out the window, fingers tracing the edge of his cup. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, a father quietly prepared to step into a room that had already judged his son. Parents' Day at Jefferson Academy was always well organized. Folding chairs aligned in neat rows, posters on the walls boasting achievements and college admissions. There were name tags at the front desk, muffins on plastic trays, and polite laughter drifting from each classroom. It was a place built on order, on the quiet assumption that certain people belonged and others had to prove why they were there. Miss Whitaker stood near the whiteboard, greeting parents with the same clipped tone she used in class. Her smile was tight, her posture perfect. She shook hands, asked about weekend plans, offered practiced praise. When Darius and Marcus arrived, the chatter thinned, just slightly. Darius walked in first. His back was straighter than usual. Behind him came Marcus. No suit, no briefcase, just calm eyes and a measured step. He wore a dark navy jacket, slacks, and carried nothing but a small leather wallet tucked into his inner coat pocket. Some parents glanced up, then looked again. One father, tall, talkative, started to speak, then stopped. Something about Marcus's presence didn't match the assumptions already built into the room. It wasn't loud or confrontational. It was quieter than that. It was certainty. Miss Whitaker blinked. "Hello," she said, reaching for a smile. "You must be Darius's." Marcus pulled out his ID and gently placed it on the table. Official. Embossed. Pentagon seal. "My name is Marcus Thompson," he said. "Cyber Defense Division." No one laughed. No one even shifted in their seat. Elaine Monroe, a 70-year-old widow who raised 3 children during the desegregation years, once said the most powerful moment in her life was when her husband walked into a courtroom that had tried to erase their son's testimony. Wearing the uniform no one expected. Sometimes presence, she said, is louder than protest. Marcus didn't offer speeches. He didn't gesture or raise his voice. He just stood beside his son, his hand lightly resting on Darius's shoulder. That gesture, steady, unshaken, held more weight than any slideshow or award pinned to the classroom wall. Darius didn't speak either. He didn't have to. The same students who had laughed now watched in silence. Some shifted in their seats. A few looked down. And Miss Whitaker, still holding her clipboard, said nothing at all. Her pen hovered above the paper, but never moved. Outside, the wind rattled the school flags. Inside, the room, so full of assumptions just days ago, was suddenly very, very quiet. And then Marcus turned, looked toward the back of the room, and asked gently, "May I say a few words to the class?" The air changed again. Marcus didn't walk to the front of the room. He stayed near the side, one hand in his pocket, the other resting casually on the edge of a desk. No podium, no formal introduction. Just a man in a quiet room full of people who had already made up their minds, until now. "I won't take much of your time," he began, voice low but clear. "I know most of you came here today to support your children. That's a good thing. It means they matter to you." He looked around, pausing just long enough for silence to settle. "Mine matters to me too." Some parents nodded politely, others kept their eyes on their laps. Miss Whitaker didn't move. Marcus continued, "It's easy to assume things, that someone is lying, or exaggerating, or trying too hard to impress. We've all done it, but there's a cost. We lose more than trust when we assume. Sometimes we lose good people." Darius sat still, not blinking, not fidgeting. His shoulders were relaxed now, not defensive, not folded in. Marcus took a slow breath. "When I was young, someone told me that the world doesn't owe you belief, that you have to prove yourself. Again and again and again. But what they didn't say is that disbelief can cut deeper than anything else, especially when it comes from the people who are supposed to teach you." There was no accusation in his voice, no anger, just a quiet clarity that made it hard to look away. Charles Wheeler, a 68-year-old retired firefighter, once said that the most painful moments in his career weren't the flames. They were the rooms where people assumed he didn't belong. "You learn to breathe differently," he said. "Not because of smoke, but because the air gets tight with judgment." In that classroom, the air was tight now. Not from heat, from recognition. Marcus looked toward Miss Whitaker. Not sharply, not for confrontation, but with the same calm he had offered his son the night before. "I don't need you to like my son," he said, "but I need you to see him for who he is, and not just when someone with a badge walks into the room." He stepped back, said thank you, and sat down beside Darius. No applause, no comments, just a silence that was heavier than before. But this time it wasn't loaded with doubt, it was reflection. Then, before anyone could speak, the school's intercom crackled to life. A voice, tight, professional, called Miss Whitaker to the front office. Then another voice, lower, unfamiliar, overrode the first. "This is a security alert. All students and staff are to remain in place. Doors will be secured immediately." Darius turned to his father. Marcus was already standing. The classroom door clicked shut, magnetic locks engaged, a soft hum filling the sudden stillness. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed too loudly. Parents glanced at one another. A few instinctively reached for their phones. Miss Whitaker froze by her desk, the announcement still echoing in the air. Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped away from Darius, slowly scanning the room, windows, exits, spacing. His voice, when it came, was calm but firm. "Move away from the windows. Sit along the inner wall, quietly." Some parents hesitated, but something in his tone, measured, used to stress, made them obey. Even Miss Whitaker, still pale, followed his instructions without a word. Darius stayed seated, but his eyes were fixed on his father. He had seen this before, not here, not in school, but in moments at home when Marcus would go quiet, almost still, whenever the news turned serious. It was a stillness that meant calculation. Marcus pulled out his phone. No signal. Expected. He reached into his coat and removed a secondary device, small, black, no bigger than a card reader. Within seconds, a quiet chime confirmed an encrypted connection. He typed in a string of code, waited. Then, finally, a voice responded through his earpiece. "This is Cipher 3. Location confirmed, lockdown verified. What's your read, Marcus?" His answer was simple. "It's real." The reply came quick. "Targeted or random?" "Targeted," he said, his eyes on Darius. "They knew he'd be here." George McBride, now 74, once served in Berlin at the height of the Cold War. He recalled that the most dangerous breaches didn't come with bombs or bullets. They came in silence, through institutions no one ever thought would be touched. Schools, churches, clinics, he said. If you want to rattle a nation, you don't go after generals, you go after their children. And that's what this was. For weeks, intelligence agencies had monitored a foreign network attempting to gather leverage against U.S. defense personnel. Most of it was chatter, suspicion. But someone had found a name, a child's name, Darius. Marcus looked back at his son. He had trained for cyber threats, data breaches, virtual incursions. But nothing prepares you for the feeling of your own child becoming a tactical target. He spoke softly. "You remember what we practiced, right?" Darius nodded. "Yes, sir." The class didn't know what they were watching. They only saw a father lean in and speak to his son like they were no longer in a school but in a different kind of operation, one where love and logic had to work side by side. Outside, a van rolled up 2 blocks away. Inside, 3 men prepared to move. One of them, tall, lean, scar across his temple, opened a photo. It was Darius, leaving school, backpack on, unaware. The man stared at the photo for a moment before muttering, "He's not just a kid, he's leverage." And his name was Anton Volk. Inside the classroom, Marcus rose once more. This time, not just as a father, but as the one man who understood exactly how far this threat would go. 2 blocks away, Anton Volk stepped out of the van with surgical precision. He didn't rush, he didn't hide. His confidence was carved from years in the field. Covert missions, psychological warfare operations buried so deep even governments pretended they didn't exist. But this wasn't just another assignment. This was personal. Inside the classroom, Marcus felt it. Not instinct, not fear. Memory. Years ago, during a classified operation overseas, Marcus had dismantled a digital network that funded Volk's mercenary pipeline. There had been no bullets, no arrests, just silence and a shutdown. But in the world Volk lived in, silence was an insult, and Marcus Thompson had become the ghost Volk couldn't forget. Now, Volk had found his pressure point, Darius. The school's emergency team was scrambling, unaware that the breach wasn't random. This wasn't a drill gone wrong, it was a surgical strike. And the clock had started. Marcus moved with intent. He pulled Darius aside, into a supply room near the back of the class. "You remember the signal app we built last summer?" he asked. Darius nodded. "The one with the kill switch?" Marcus handed him a small keychain device. "Keep this with you. If anything happens, anything, you press twice. Don't try to be brave, try to be smart." Darius didn't argue. Judith Bryant, now 69, once shared how her husband, an undercover field agent, used to leave behind handwritten notes with instructions, not because he expected disaster, but because he knew plans collapse fast when love gets in the way. "He told me," she said, "sometimes the only thing more dangerous than a threat is thinking you're strong enough to face it alone." But Marcus wasn't alone. He contacted his handler. "Volk is here. It's him. He's after Darius." The response was sharp. "You need to evacuate now." Marcus looked through the window. Too late. Anton Volk had already bypassed the outer gate, posing as a contractor. His ID was forged, his movements measured, deliberate to make noise. He was there to extract. Inside the classroom, Marcus moved the parents and students into the hallway using his credentials to override the magnetic lock. "We're not waiting for protocol," he told Miss Whitaker, whose face had gone pale. "We're moving now." Darius followed close behind. But in the maze of corridors there was a moment. A wrong turn, a misplaced door, and just like that, father and son were separated. Marcus turned back. "Darius?" No answer. Then a voice, deep, familiar, slipped through the hallway. "Is this the boy you were so proud of, Marcus?" Anton Volk stood near the science lab, hand resting on the shoulder of Darius, who looked up, wide-eyed but unshaken. "I didn't come to hurt him," Volk said. "Just wanted to say hello, remind you that you cost me more than money." Marcus stepped forward. "Let him go." "I could," Volk replied, "but where's the lesson in that? What happened next wasn't planned, wasn't clean." Darius shifted slightly, just enough to drop the keychain to the floor. 2 quick taps. Signal sent, emergency lights activated, doors slammed shut across the building. And for the first time, Anton Volk looked unsure. Marcus moved, not as an agent, not even as a father, but as a man who had drawn a line and would never let it be crossed. 3 days passed before Jefferson Academy reopened its doors. The news moved quickly, as it always does when danger meets privilege. Attempted abduction at elite school. Pentagon operative thwarts attack. Headlines told part of the story. What they missed was what happened the morning classes resumed, before the cameras returned, before the district released its statement, before the press conference where officials spoke in careful tones. That morning, Miss Whitaker stood at the front of her classroom holding a single sheet of paper. She didn't wear her usual blazer, no clipboard, no authority layered into her voice, just a white envelope and eyes that had seen something shift, not just in the school, but in herself. Darius sat in the third row, same spot, same backpack. But this time he wasn't alone in silence. Ms. Whitaker looked at the students that the parents invited for a special announcement. Her voice was steady, but softer than they had ever heard. "I owe someone in this room a public apology." The class held still. She turned to Darius. "I questioned your honesty. I allowed my doubt to shape how others treated you. I taught facts, but failed to listen. I'm sorry." No one clapped. No one needed to. The weight of the moment wasn't performative. It was restorative. She continued, "Starting today, Jefferson Academy will begin a series of internal reviews on faculty training, inclusive policies, and accountability systems. Not because of a news story, but because trust is not a slogan. It's a practice." Darius didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked back at her and gave the smallest gesture of acknowledgement, a blink that held more strength than 100 loud responses. Roberto Jimenez, a 73-year-old retired teacher who watched the live stream of the statement from his home in San Antonio, said later, "That wasn't just an apology. That was a surrender of ego. And when a teacher lays that down, even for a second, the whole system takes notice." Outside the classroom, the school had changed in ways too small to headline but too big to ignore. Some teachers spoke more carefully, others listened longer. A few students who once rolled their eyes at Darius now sat beside him at lunch. Nothing was perfect. No reform ever is. But something had cracked, and through the crack, something human started to grow. As Darius left class that afternoon, a student who had laughed the loudest during his presentation walked up beside him. He didn't say much, just, "You good?" Darius nodded. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. And when he stepped through the front door of the school, Marcus was waiting. This time not as a protector, but as a witness. The house was quiet when Darius got home. No headlines playing from the living room TV. No calls from relatives asking how he was. Just the sound of a cat stretching near the window and the faint smell of his father's coffee still warm on the table. On the kitchen counter sat a folder, plain, labeled in pen, "Scholarships, Cybersecurity." Inside were brochures, application forms, and a small, sticky note in Marcus's handwriting. "Protect what matters, starting with yourself." Darius didn't say anything. He just read the note twice, folded it, and slid it into his backpack. The next few weeks moved without drama. No more lockdowns, no more interruptions, just school, homework, and the quiet shift that happens when a room starts to see someone differently. It wasn't that people suddenly praised him. That would have been easier to dismiss. It was more subtle. Doors stayed open longer. Teachers listened with fewer interruptions. A group project invite showed up in his inbox. His name, once spoken like a challenge, now came with a pause of consideration. Brenda Wallace, 66, watched the video of Marcus's classroom speech on a community page and wept. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. "That's how change looks for us," she said. "Not with fists, with a voice that's calm enough to be trusted and firm enough not to be ignored." Miss Whitaker began a new routine, ending every week with an open question. No grades, no pressure, just space. One Friday she asked, "What does justice look like when no one's watching?" Darius didn't raise his hand. He wrote his answer down. "It looks like telling the truth anyway." The room stayed quiet after that. Not awkward, just respectful. Because now they knew who he was, and more importantly, who he had always been. Marcus never bragged about the day, never told stories. When people called to congratulate him, he kept it short. "We're good," he said. "My son's safe, that's all that matters." But one afternoon, weeks later, Darius found him on the back porch, laptop open, reviewing cyber threat assessments. "Are they still watching?" Darius asked. Marcus closed the laptop. They always are. But now, so are we. And in that moment, father and son didn't need to speak about what had happened, because what mattered wasn't the fear or the fight. It was the fact that this time, the truth wasn't shouted down. It stood up, it spoke, and someone listened. In a world where judgment often comes before listening, the story of Darius and his father Marcus reminds us that trust is not something given freely. It's something built, protected, and sometimes reclaimed through quiet strength and integrity. For many older adults who have lived through years of being doubted for their background, skin color, or profession, the image of a father entering a classroom not to argue, but simply to affirm his son's truth, holds deep emotional weight. This story asks a question we all must face at some point. When confronted with bias, do we choose silence for comfort, or do we speak up to be seen? In today's world, where kindness is sometimes mistaken for weakness, Marcus's response is a powerful reminder. Kindness, when paired with clarity and courage, doesn't just change a moment. It can shift a system. And maybe that's what we need to remember most. It's not about who speaks the loudest, but who stands their ground when the room falls silent. That's where real change begins, with those who choose to act with quiet conviction, even when the world expects them to disappear. Type 1 if you've ever felt powerless in the face of authority. Type 2 if you still believe kindness can prevail. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story made you reflect, share it with someone who's ever been judged unfairly. You don't need to explain. They'll understand. And if you want to keep following stories that speak to justice, truth, and quiet strength, hit subscribe. We're not done telling them.